So we are live streamed on YouTube right now. So I will go ahead and admit all of the participants. Then we'll do some brief introductions on my part, and I will hand it over to Nora as the moderator. All right, hello everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. Welcome to the Public Leadership Education Network April PLEN Talk. We are so happy to have all of you here today. I'm Julia Fisher. I'm the communications intern here at PLEN, and we're going to be putting on just a brief fireside chat with Tracie Potts of the Eisenhower Institute, moderated by my colleague through the Luther College Washington semester program, Nora. She'll have a brief introduction about herself. Some brief reminders before we get started. This will be broadcasted on our YouTube channel live. So if your camera is on, which is encouraged, your likeness will be on our YouTube channel. Additionally, there will be time at the end of this session for audience questions. So feel free to put those or raise your hand on Zoom, and we will call on you, and you'll be able to facilitate those questions towards the last 20 minutes of this discussion. So with no further ado, Nora is currently the program assistant at intern at Public Leadership Education Network. She is pursuing a degree in International Studies, Peace and Dialogue, and Women and Gender Studies at Luther College. She is part of the United World Colleges alumni, having studied for 3 years in Japan at UWC ISAK Japan. She is passionate about refugee rights and women's rights, having worked with organizations such as Asylum Connect and being an activist at Sisters to Sisters Myanmar. She recently finished serving as Luther's College Ambassador to the Iowa United Nations Association. Being originally from Myanmar, Nora knows firsthand the need for women's involvement in public policy across all ages and is elated to help PLEN inspiring new leaders nationally and internationally. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Nora.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. I'm so honored to be the moderator for Tracie Potts, our esteemed guest speaker today. And Tracie and I met as part of the Lutheran College Washington semester program. I got to hear Tracie at the Eisenhower Institute and just was inspired endlessly by her career path and what she's been doing recently to be very active in the role of media and beyond. So without further ado, I would love for Tracie to introduce herself and explain all the great things that she has done.
Wow, that's quite an introduction, Nora. Thank you so much. It was a joy to meet you at the LCWS event, and I'm pleased to be here today and to meet everyone else. I will just give you a little bit of background on who I am and what I do, and I really look forward to getting into questions, your questions, and questions from others as well. Because what I have learned and what I think is what's most important when you come to these things is sometimes what people tell you, but also what I can learn from you and what we can learn from each other. As Nora said, I'm the executive director of the Eisenhower Institute, fairly new, of about 6 months. I made a big career turn last fall from 30 years as a journalist, as a broadcast journalist, to now an educator and a leader and a supporter of young women and a supporter of young people in general, which has really been a theme, I think, throughout my career. I started 30 years ago as really a high school student who was interested in journalism. I sort of fell into it I went to a new school, and you know how it is, you go to a new school and you're looking for a place to fit in, something to do. I ended up on the high school television crew and did some reporting. I did some print reporting as well with the newspaper at my high school. I was the editor of the yearbook, and did a little bit of work with our literary magazine. And I thought to myself at the time, this idea of writing and telling stories and being able to talk to people and find out information and share it, I love doing this. This is fascinating. And I actually said at one point, I think I could do this for free for the rest of my life. I don't say that to any of my bosses today, however. But I think the key there is I found something that I loved to do and went to college and became trained in how to do it and how to do it well, and then launched out into the world to try to do just that. So that was my career path. I started out working in a small television station in Huntsville, Alabama, as the health reporter, and was there just under a year before I moved to Knoxville, Tennessee, where I got to cover education, which again has been sort of a theme through my life, even now as I sit at a college in a position here. Not something that I had planned, but definitely something that I prepared for. That was a great almost 5 years in Tennessee, because I feel that was a time in my career that I grew. And you'll get to this point where you can feel growth sometimes. You know, when you're doing something new and something different, and you've learned new skills and you're eager to learn more. And I think that was really a growth period for me in my career. I got a chance to work on the anchor desk for the first time. I developed an education beat and did some unique reporting and special reports, and was supported in doing so. And then I fell in love and got married and moved to the West Coast, and ended up getting a great opportunity to work for NBC News there, and eventually in Washington. When I moved to Washington, and we can talk about this later, I was kind of scared. I had a lot of years under my belt, but this was a new challenge. And throughout your career and throughout your life, there are times when things ebb and flow, and you may be on top of your game, but then you face a new challenge. It happened to me again, 30 years into my career last year. But going to Washington was a big one. And I got there, and I initially spent some time working as a Washington-based Capitol Hill reporter, but my focus was federal health policy. And then I really fell into sort of doing day-to-day politics on Capitol Hill, until I realized that it was time for a change, and I wanted to be able to contribute in a different way. And so here I am, now working at a small college in Pennsylvania, managing their Washington office, but also sort of going back and forth between the two states, and trying to use the experience that I gained over years in volunteer work, working in media, working with students, working in my community as a volunteer, the things that I learned as a journalist. They call us a jack of all trades, because we learn a lot of things about many different parts of life, and now using that to support student experiential learning, really giving them experiences outside the classroom through our Gettysburg office and our Washington office to enhance what they're learning in the classroom, but also giving them a little bit of life advice. I take that very seriously as a part of my job. Most students who come through my office will tell you there's some point in the conversation where I'll say, I'm taking off my executive director hat now, and I'm putting on my mom hat, or I'm putting on my colleague hat, to tell you some things that I think will be helpful, that have been shared with me, or experiences that I've had. So that's sort of an overview, Nora, I think, of my career, and I really look forward to the conversation.
Of course. Thank you for sharing, Tracie. I'm overjoyed and reminded again of why we chose specifically you for this talk all about media, and like tackling media literacy, and how to, obtain sources that we see today in a great way that is not too consuming when we are approaching news. So with that, I would like to ask you the first question. You stated earlier that you started off with health reports in Alabama. Do you remember how you felt when you first began your career? What about your general outlook has changed, and what has stayed the same?
Good question. So I have told this story to a number of people about my first day on the job. I like to tell people that it was a bit of baptism by fire. The first day I went to work as an official reporter, I've graduated, I've got my degree, and I'm pursuing my passion, and I want to be a television news reporter. My first day on the job in Huntsville, Alabama, I was assigned to just accompany another more experienced reporter and his photographer on an interview. It was a feature story. It was a basic interview, nothing big about it. They just kind of wanted me to be a ride along that day and get my feet wet. As we were traveling, the police scanner in the media vehicle in our car went off and said that there was a shooting at the courthouse. And I actually told this story to the reporter recently. I caught up with him on Facebook, and I said, "Do you remember this happened?" I don't think that he did. But there was a shooting at the courthouse, and this is a small town. It's a big deal. All of a sudden, police vehicles and media vehicles are rushing to the middle of town, and our station wanted us to go as well. Well, this reporter didn't want to do that. He wanted to go cover his assigned story. And he goes, "Well, just drop the new girl off. Let her do it. And we can go and do the thing that I had set up." So they literally dropped me on the sidewalk with no camera. I had never been on television other than during college, when I did some exercises. And I did work for a small TV station while I was in college, but professionally, I had never done this. And I'm standing on the sidewalk and people are running back and forth. This had just happened. So people were running back and forth. I didn't know who the police spokesperson was. I'm kind of in the middle of, what do I do here? I was very uncomfortable in that situation. And I think it's important for people to know that, because people look at me and they go, "Oh, it's Tracie Potts. I've seen her on NBC News." But I started out as a scared young reporter on a sidewalk, not knowing who to ask and what to ask. Fortunately, a photographer was sent for me to help me out. And he kind of grabbed me by the arm and he said, "There's the police spokesman over there. Go ask him some questions. Look like maybe there's the family over there. Maybe talk to them." The bottom line was that was my first day working in journalism. I almost didn't get on the air. I was afraid. I thought, "Oh God, are they going to fire me after the first day?" They did not. And I learned from that experience, and I learned moving forward. You asked me what things have changed and what things have stayed the same. I was trained, I went to Northwestern University. I got my bachelor's and master's there in journalism. And I was trained in what I like to call old school journalism, right? You go out to get a story, you're objective, you tell all sides of it. And that's sort of the approach. A lot of things have changed. The technology has changed. That program that I went through is very different now. It's a multimedia program. Back then we had to specify, do you want to work for a newspaper? Do you want to work for television? Do you want to work for a magazine? Now students are trained to do everything because in the Washington Post, they have a camera in the newsroom. Those reporters aren't just writing. They're also on MSNBC doing commentary about their stories. The thing I think that has changed the most is that the line between reporting news and commentary, opinion, has blurred quite a bit. And it makes it difficult for the audience. It makes it difficult for viewers like yourself to know, what am I listening to? And I think this really gets into the news literacy piece that we were talking about. What am I listening to? Is this person telling me facts? Are they telling me their opinion? Are they putting facts in context? Is this perspective? It gets really difficult for people to sort that out.
Of course, definitely. Thank you for sharing such a vulnerable moment in your life and how you overcame it very strongly. And that's wonderful to know. And definitely, I feel like as a student myself, it's been hard to navigate like what sources to tell and what are the opinions that we should be relying on. What is the truth? among all of this news is that we're getting. So moving on to the next question, this touches a bit on what you've talked about before. What are some organizations or opportunities that you took advantage of as a student that were meaningful or led you to where you are today? You talked a little bit about the TV club and then journalism as your own like bachelor and master's degree, but can you please share us more details and what inspires you?
Yeah, certainly. So when I was in college, so I talked a little bit about high school, so I'll move forward. When I was in college, at the time, Northwestern had the largest college-run radio station in the country, WNUR. And it actually was housed in a different school. I was in the journalism school. This was the School of Radio, TV, Film. But I volunteered as a news reader on the college radio station. I did that, I think, for at least a couple of years while I was there. And what I learned from that, it gave me good journalism skills, some solid skills of determining what's important and what do people need to know and how do I distill that in a short period of time, because that's the thing about broadcast journalism. You don't have a lot of time to tell people important things. So I really got a chance to, I would go into the basement of this old building where the radio station was, and I would pull wire copy, AP stories, the Associated Press, UPI, I think was still operating back then. And I had to learn what we call news judgment. All of this raw information was there. And I had to determine what's the most important story. I've got maybe 3 minutes to share 3 or 4 stories. What's most important? What do people need to know? And what details about that story do I need to share because I don't have time to tell it all? And how do I do that? One thing that I learned over time is your voice as a reporter. That's something that develops over time. And I don't mean just your physical voice, what you're hearing, but your style of telling a story. I didn't have it back then. I was a college student, but I was learning. It was a great learning opportunity. I literally found an old cassette tape many years later that I popped in and I was listening. I was like, who is that? I had no idea it was me. Hi, this is Tracie. Welcome to I had no idea that it was my voice. So my physical voice, but also my voice as a storyteller started to change. You become more confident. You start to learn what it is that's important to tell and how to tell that in a way that you can connect with the audience. So to answer your question, for people who may be interested in news or journalism, I think that any organization on campus that gives you that hands-on opportunity, like the radio station did for me, is a great opportunity. But outside of that, one of the things about journalism is you need to know a lot about a lot of things. So there's the technical aspect of learning how to write and report, but you're writing and reporting about something. So I would encourage young people, young adults to pursue your passion. I think that if you're interested in public policy, if you're interested in science or STEM, if you're interested in the arts, all of these things will be of use to you. I was in a women's residential college when I was in school. So we learned about women's issues. And now I actually, I've spent many years reporting on some of those issues. I now run a program that has a women in leadership program. So all of these things connect.
Thank you for sharing that whatever you do can be helpful later on in your life and in building that career trajectory that you want and deserve. And so with that, I'm going to ask you, were there any limitations you faced in the workplace because of your identity? And how did you navigate this? Or are there other challenges that you have faced that you would like to share?
So obviously, probably doesn't need to be said, I'm a woman of color. I'm probably going to give you a different answer than other people do. And I think we all have to share what our own experience is. So 2 people, one of whom is on this call, my mother, really encouraged me and inspired me when it came to how to look at that in terms of my career. I was not raised to wear my gender or my race and ethnicity as kind of a chip on my shoulder. Everybody's experience is different. My experience was to be proud of it, to use it as necessary, but not to have a mindset that I am limited because I'm a woman, or I'm limited because I'm an African American, but to be the best and be excellent at whatever it is that you do. So that's what my mom told me. So that's what I thought was the gospel. So I went forward with that. The other person who I remember very well gave me some great advice on this was my internship director. And boy, I wish I had not lost contact with her because she had a huge impact on me. Back in Chicago, when I worked at a TV station while I was in college, I did an internship. And she said to me, Tracie, you're a pretty girl. That's what she thought. You're smart, you're capable. You have achieved a number of things as a student. And you are going to be offered opportunities. Be careful what you take. Choreograph your own career and don't let other people decide what you should be and where you should be. Make sure that when you take an opportunity, you're prepared to be successful at it. And her point was, some newsrooms have no Black female reporters and they'll need one and they'll offer it to you. Make sure you are prepared to be successful in that market. Don't let people pull you faster than you need to go. If you need to be in a small market for a few years, kind of like, Knoxville where I was, or Huntsville, where you can make some mistakes and become very good. And then when you get to a larger market, you're ready to be there, make that choice and do that. I thought it was great advice.
So good. That is so good for any young professional to hear this. It's really rewarding. And I would like to give a shout out to your mother too for joining us today and giving us such great wisdom that Tracie is now sharing to us. So thank you for that. And so let's move on. So another question is, what has been the most surprising thing you have encountered in your career?
I think that one of the surprising things I will tell you is how much people are willing to talk to reporters. I have been in some, especially when I cover local news, I've been in some difficult situations. I've been in neighborhoods after there's been a crime. I've had to, do that thing that reporters get dinged for and nobody really wants to do, which is knock on the door of a victim's family and say, hi, I would love to talk to you. And there's a way to do that without being intrusive. And I learned that over time. But I was often shocked when people said yes. And they wanted to tell their stories. They wanted to share the human aspect of their loved one who was in an accident or who was shot or who died of a terrible disease. I used to be a health reporter, I mentioned, in Huntsville, Alabama. And my assignment was usually in the morning, there's a new American Medical Association journal article about X, illness or disease. Go find someone in town who has that and get the personal view of that. It's difficult to track someone down in a day, knock on their door, and not to just talk to them, but you have a camera behind you. Hi, I'd like you to tell your personal details and your personal story and share it with the thousands of people, or eventually when I worked with NBC, millions of people. And how often people said yes surprised me. Sometimes I think when you are sensitive and genuine about wanting to share with someone's story, it helps to build trust. And oftentimes I would get people who would just start talking. I also tried to be really careful with that too. People would sometimes tell me things on camera, and I think afterwards, did they really intend to say that to millions of people? It was kind of personal. It's not necessary to tell the story. And sometimes I would leave those details out in respect of that person. And it would not hurt the storytelling. But I think over time, I would hope that I built a reputation that people could trust me with the stories that they had to tell.
Oh, that's wonderful. Building rapport must be such a big part of you as a reporter. And I'm just happy that perhaps like they really felt comfortable by the way that you approached them. So if you could share students some tips about like how to make someone comfortable too, please feel free to do so. And I would also like to point out that Tracie has served as a vice chair of the USC Annenberg Center for Health Journalism Advisory Board after being selected as the 2017 National Fellow. So why I'm saying this is because you mentioned about how you started off with like medical health journalism, and then that has played off in your career much later on too. So I hope everyone here on this call knows that, again, whatever you chose to do can play out really well later on in life. And yes, so do you have any ways to share on how to approach really harsh situations, especially like you said, victims who are going to—
I think first of all, be human and be transparent and even a little vulnerable yourself. So oftentimes if I had to approach someone who was a victim or who was vulnerable, I would ask my photographer to stay back or stay in the car. I didn't walk right up to the person unless it was an urgent situation, like, you know, on the street or something like that. But even then, I would usually ask my photographer to hang back for a minute so I could introduce myself and talk to the person and tell them what I wanted. If it was, you know, where they had experienced a death or something like that, I would say, you know what? All the world knows about your loved one is this is a person who was killed, or this is a person who was in an accident. But I think there's more to that person that you know. This was a person, and we would love you to help us tell their story. Oftentimes, I think that resonates with people because, you know, media is so short. When I left last fall, the stories I were doing were, you know, they were averaging a minute 15, a minute 20. And I was talking about politics, but in 75 or 80 seconds, you can't say a lot. But sometimes you can share a little bit of insight into humanity, and I think people appreciate that. So sometimes I'd ask the photographer to hang back, just out of respect. I'd have a conversation with the person, and then often, and I would usually work this out with my photographer in advance, I'd say when I start talking to them, just roll the camera, because what makes people nervous often is when you have these conversations. Okay, let me adjust the lights. Let me do this. Can you fix this? Let me fix your shirt. Okay, now go. It's kind of like the stereotype that you see in movies when the red light comes on, people freeze up. But when people are just talking, they don't. And so that's what we like to capture. And I try to make it more of a conversation than a question and answer. And then finally, I learned this from someone else. Silence is golden. And sometimes when a person is speaking and you just pause for a bit and leave a little bit of silence, they'll just keep talking and something else will come to them. And I often found that the best sound bites or the best part of the story that we shared was after we just let a person think for a second and tell the rest of their story.
That's really wonderful. I'm really glad you went into the details and the tips on how to, you know, approach a person very mindfully and with compassion. So thank you, Tracie. Let's move on. I'm going to ask how you feel about media as a whole has changed and given the rise of social media. You touched on it a little bit already, but it'll be great.
Yeah. So I'm glad you asked me that, Nora, because I really do want to spend some time talking about media literacy and how we, as an audience, need to be mindful of where we're getting our news from and how we're consuming our news. I used to do a presentation for high school students that compared news consumption to food. And I told them, you wouldn't just stop at any place on the corner and get your food. You don't know, it doesn't look clean. You don't know how it was made. You go to places that you trust, right? Sometimes you look and you see, okay, there's an A or a B, where the health authorities have said that this is a place that I can trust. We need to look at consuming news the same way. Social media is a reality. And there are a lot of good things about social media, but the challenge is it is raw information, not necessarily news, and not certainly journalism. Raw information out of context is bad enough. But now we have a phenomenon where we have not only misinformation, but disinformation, where information is put out deliberately to mislead. That's the intent of the information. And how do you and I, as news consumers, know this? The first and best thing we can do is to make sure that where we're getting our news from is a trustworthy source. So teachers used to tell kids, and I used to tell my kids in high school, right, when they're doing research, Google is not a source. Google is not a source. Google is great. Nobody from Google called me, and tell me I use it all the time. But Google itself is not a source. It's a search engine that leads you to sources of information. So look at the about page of organizations when you're on a website. Are they partisan? Because usually they'll tell you. Who are they funded by? What is their mission? If their mission is to convince the world of XYZ, then everything they say is going to be supporting that. So be careful. If the mission of journalists is, as you said earlier, Nora, is to tell the truth and to get to the truth. Now, journalists. So there are news talk programs, there are traditional news programs, there's new media, there's ethnic media. I'm a big fan of ethnic media because just because you're covering something from a particular perspective doesn't make it bad. Sometimes it's really good. You and I talked about that, right? With newspapers and with media that will look at something from the perspective of a particular community, the Black community, or women, or I was talking to some journalists recently in the Native American community. They are asking questions that other journalists may not ask. So I just want to be clear, that's not a bad thing. I just want to, in fact, it's a really good thing, but just know where you're getting your information from. If it's just some raw information, if it's video, did that really happen? I was just reading this morning about one of my former colleagues on MSNBC. There's a viral video that's going around, but it's completely out of context. It was her saying something about, the president 4 or 5 years ago, now being used in a completely different context. Do not believe everything that you see and you read. If it evokes an emotion, an immediate emotional reaction, just stop. Stop before you share it. Stop before you take it as truth. And sometimes just a little bit of investigation will reveal that often that information is out of context.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful, especially with everything that is going on in the world today, local and global, with Ukraine, Myanmar, Afghanistan, many more. So thank you for that, Tracie, truly. So the next question is, we talked about the disinformation and misinformation part of this and how it is such a concern for many individuals. So what does media literacy mean to you personally? And how do you respond to people's distrust of the media personally?
Good question. Media literacy to me is, it's like literacy, learning to read. Media literacy is learning where to get your news and how to look at news. And the distrust of media, I must tell you, is very disheartening, but I do understand it. I think that we as an industry need to do a lot more to rebuild and gain that trust. And some media organizations are doing that very well. We need to give people a better window into what we do and how we do it. You know, how's the sausage made, as opposed to just expecting people to take our word for it. NBC that I used to work with now has an organization that I was working with right before I left called NBCU Academy, where they do videos and they show you, you know, when we put together stories and we say this came from a senior administration official, what does that mean? Why do we tell people that? What does that mean? How does that person have any authority? Or when we report something, what are our standards so that you can know and trust the information? We double source things. So unless it came from an official source, we make sure that we get it corroborated from two people before we bring it to you. Those kinds of things people need to know so that they can trust us. And so I think the media as a whole, that we can do a lot more to open the door a little bit and show people how we do what we do. Because I will tell you, in my 30 years in the business, sure, I ran into some journalists that cut corners, that, you know, weren't always on the up and up with how they told stories, but not as many as the honest, everyday working journalists, producers, reporters, photographers, editors, assignment managers. Most of the people I worked with worked really hard to bring you accurate information. And so it's really disheartening when we get this big fat label thrown on, you know, we don't trust the media. Society has changed.
Yes.
People used to, you know, the Walter Cronkites of the world used to be admired because they would bring you the straight story. Now, what we're finding is because society has changed, people are seeking out news that reflects what they already believe.
That's right.
And so for those of us who are trying to kind of tell it straight in the middle, sometimes you're going to like what I say and sometimes you don't. You talked about social media. I used to get comments on my social media when I was reporting, you are just too liberal and you love Obama. And then I would get comments, you're just way too conservative. You must be a Trumper. I go, okay, I must be doing something right, because people, you know, seem to put me on one side or the other when I'm really just trying to be in the middle and honest with people. It's disheartening, but I understand how it's happened. And I think we in the media can really start to do something to turn that around, because people need to trust the media. We are the fourth estate. We were set up, you know, as part of the foundation of this country, as part of the US Constitution. There's a reason why there's freedom of the press, right? And why there's freedom of speech. We are the check and balance on our government and how our government is doing, how our government is doing things. And people need to be able to trust that.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. It's really great to think about how a journalist themselves, who as a person with like biases and then different things, can maintain that, you know, middle ground, like you said too. And I almost wonder if these days it's hard to trust, because like you said, media has become more a little bit about opinion when they are reporting, rather than like simply reporting. So thank you for that, Tracie.
Well, can I just add real quickly, you brought up a really good point. And I used to share this with students all the time about the difference in bias and perspective. Yes. I think it's really important for people to understand that, because bias is when I'm trying to convince you to think a certain way. And that's not my role. My role is to present to you information, to put it in context, right? Because numbers and reports and surveys and opinions have to be balanced and in context. But then you make up your mind what you think about that. Perspective is different. I approached my stories with the perspective of, you know, I'm a parent, I'm a woman, I'm an African-American, I'm a Southerner. There are questions that I will ask based on my perspective, based on my experience, that other journalists may not ask. And because their experience is different. And I think that perspective is important, because then it is inclusive. It's bringing the communities and the people that I represent into the reporting of the story. I'm not telling you what to think, but I'm seeking information that you may not have otherwise seen.
That is wonderful. I've never really had bias versus perspective explained this way, but this is wonderful and a great information to remember. And I saw there are some questions in the chat, but please hold still. We'll have 15 minutes at the end to ask specific questions to Tracie. So we're going to continue with what we have. And one of the things is, how do you, Tracie, personally ensure to maintain your well-being while staying up to date in consuming media these days?
Having a little tech difficulty.
Please hold on 1 second. We might be having some technical difficulties. We'll get right back to it. Thank you for being patient while we try to figure out some of the technical difficulties that are offering at this moment. So just 1 moment, please.
Hi, am I back?
Yes, Tracie, you are back. Welcome back. And sorry about that. I'm not sure what quite happened here.
I'm so sorry about that. But it reminded me of my days in TV when all of a sudden things happen and you just, you just have to roll with the punches, so to speak.
Welcome back still, and thank you everyone for waiting and being patient about this issue. So we got cut off when I was asking about global news today and how you personally ensure your well-being is, in a good place.
Yeah, and I was saying that I my bosses would have hated if I ever said this when I worked in media, but I don't now. Sometimes you gotta turn the TV off. Sometimes we have to back up and distance ourselves from the constant flow of troubling information and look at what's actually happening in our lives and our world around us, right? Our families, our places of worship in our communities, the people who are with us. Those are real parts of our lives. And while I will always be an advocate for information and journalism and truth, it can weigh on you. There are a lot of wonderful things happening in the world, frankly, that we don't hear enough about. And there are a lot of really troubling things that happen in our world. And I think it's important for our mental health and well-being to put that in perspective, and to remember that we have to create oftentimes our own sense of balance by limiting how much we allow that flow of information to affect us. I mean, really, I learned this, I started practicing this a couple of years ago. If you just take 5 minutes out of your day and just stop and close your eyes and think, what do I need right now? What's happening? How do I feel right now? Am I anxious? Am I nervous? Am I excited? I think it's really good to reconnect that way, and don't let what's happening externally drive you or drive me and how I feel, but to really try to reconnect with ourselves and the people around us.
That's really great. You gave a great point on like seeing what is too much for you, what is enough for you, and deciding that that's so very important. And at the same time, that is a great segue into the other question, because how would we take an active approach to the news that we do choose to accept into us? Like, how would we approach with an active constituency as a professional and as a person who might not be in the media field?
So connecting to the question that you asked before, one way that we can balance how these things make us feel is to get involved and do something about it. My family and most people who know me know that I have been very involved in my community, and I do that because it makes me feel good when I see a problem or I see an issue or I see a challenge, and I think, you know what, I can do something to have an impact on that. I can change that. I can work with other people, not single-handedly, but I can work with other people. I can work with organizations to make that better. And I think that's another way that we can balance what's going on. And so I have found that being involved in the community, for me, it started when my kids started school, and I got involved in the PTA, and that turned into, a whole bunch of other community things, often centered around education. But I wanted my kids and other children in my neighborhood and around them to have a good education. So if that meant I needed to work on family engagement, which was my area, to get more families understanding the system and involved, I can do that. If it meant working with other organizations in the community to connect them to people who had need, that make you feel good, make you feel much better about some of the things that are troubling us.
Yes, and it gives you agency, and that you can do
exactly
change in the places that you can, not like to go crazy with what
exactly. And not only in your, in your own home, being supportive of those in your own home. In my church, there are times when I have been able to take my professional expertise and support either young people or older people in my church. That to me has been very fulfilling.
Thank you so much, Tracie. We have one last question before I'm going to turn it over to the audience for some questions that we have. But this last question is, what are some readings, podcasts, and social media handles that students can follow to learn more and keep up with the news? Or you could share which specific news program you follow at this moment very closely.
So obviously I watch NBC because I spent the 24 years working there. I'm also a big fan of PBS. I think that PBS does a great job of, I was actually talking to one of my former colleagues who works there now on their weekend broadcast. And I think they do a good job of letting stories breathe, as we like to say. I think watching foreign news outlets is really good. Now we have 200 channels on our TV, and oftentimes watching news from another country's perspective, especially news about the United States, I think really will broaden our thoughts about things that are happening and how sometimes they are seen differently. But the most important resource that I would probably share is the News Literacy Project. I have volunteered with them for over a dozen years now. I work on their National Leadership Council, and they have really become, started by a former journalist with the LA Times, and they have really become a leader in helping people see and understand misinformation. So newslit.org is their handle, and they're on all the social media. You can find them, the News Literacy Project. Of the many things that I have done and the many things that I have had to take off my plate, that is one that I feel very strongly about. And so I do continue to work with them because I see the good work that they've done. We built a whole digital literacy platform to be used in schools. And I actually teach one of the lessons. This was many, many years ago that I started doing that. But they're really investing time into helping make sure the younger generation begins to look at news very critically.
Awesome. Thank you for this resource, especially because you yourself teach one of the courses. Could you let us know if it's free for anyone to have access to?
Yes, it is. That platform particularly, and they actually have a new app called Informable. So you can actually download this app and kind of test yourself on, am I getting some of these things? Am I, aware of misinformation when it happens? So I found that to be really good. And one last one I'll mention, a fellow journalist started a podcast called Becoming Storytellers. And if you want to know, you were asking me earlier about journalists and our motivation and why we do what we do. She interviews a lot of journalists, and I have, myself included, but many others. And I really like her podcast. I've listened to quite a few of them because you get the backstory of why people, and when you talk about building trust, I think you'll see that there are a lot of journalists out there who are doing this for the right reasons.
That's lovely. Well, I could be asking questions all day with you because I'm so very excited, but I'm going to turn it over to the audience and see if they have any questions they want to address and help you elaborate on some of the things that you've said too. Sure. So please let us know if you have any questions. You can raise the hand on Zoom and we can call onto you, or there's actually one of the questions in the chat by Hyekbo. And if you'd like us to read it out, please feel free.
I think when I lost internet, I lost what was in the chat previously. So if you could read them to me, I'd appreciate it.
Oh, I'd love to. So this is a question from Hyekbo, and this is it says, has there been a case of your interviewee being personally targeted after the news has been published? And how does that affect you? That is a wonderful question.
Ooh, that is, and it's a distributing question because you never want to be the reason that someone is experiencing something like that. Not that I'm aware of that anyone has come back to me, because that would make it hard to sleep at night. If someone was targeted because of what I broadcast. And that's another reason why I say, when I've done interviews with people, sometimes I'm careful. They may overshare, and I may go back and go, I'm really not sure that they want everybody to know where they live, or I'm really not sure that they want everyone to be aware of X, Y, and Z. So we have to be responsible in that way.
No, that is so wonderful. It's in your hands and you can control it. So that's a really great way to put it. Are there other questions on the floor that we can address to Tracie? You can please feel free to put it in the chat, or please say it out loud after raising your hands.
I can come in with a question. Field experience versus filtering opportunities. We talked a lot about how it's important to not just take any opportunity that comes your way and decide if that's right for you. But I feel like as young professionals, we're told the opposite. We're told to take absolutely anything that you can. So what is your more in-depth advice on getting in the field and having experience versus filtering the right opportunity for you?
That's a really good question. And there's a thread of reality in there that I did not mention. So I'm glad you asked the question. People have to pay their bills, right? So when you have a job offer or an opportunity offer, sometimes you have to do that. But I will go back to the advice that I was given about choreographing your own career. It's not always going to go in a straight line, right? So sometimes you may take an opportunity, you may take a position because you have to in the moment. It may not be the thing you really want to do, but you never know. So one of two things can happen. You're going to learn from that opportunity, number one. Number two, you never know. It may actually, look at me, I'm in a completely different career field than I started. And sometimes you will discover things that you weren't exposed to previously. So I want to make sure I share this and put this in context properly. If you have an opportunity and you feel you can do it, yeah, give it a try. But if you have choices, I think that's what I was trying to address. What are you going after? What opportunities are you seeking? Sometimes jobs fall in your lap and sometimes they don't, right? Sometimes we look for them very hard and very long before we get them. I'm talking mostly professionally here. So what are you seeking? Are you kind of throwing everything at the wall? I think my advice would be as focused as you can about what you want. Make your best effort to prepare for that, and then have some faith in yourself that you can go down that path. The path may not be straight, and that's okay. You may not get the best opportunity that you want in the beginning, and that's okay. But don't completely give up if you have a desire or a dream to do something. I hope that put that in a little more context, because you asked a really good question.
Well, that was excellent. Thank you.
That's wonderful. Are there any other questions on the floor? Please feel free to put it in the chat if you would rather us read it out to Tracie for you.
Can I have a question? Oh.
There's an echo. Sorry about that. Would you like to put the question in the chat, please?
And a few viewers had to drop off as it has gotten approaching the end of the hour, but people were putting in the chat, just thank you for being here.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for your time. So if I let you know that as well.
Oh, yes. While you dropped off earlier, due to the internet connection, there was somebody who left a thank you note for you.
Oh, that was so nice of them. I will say, while Andrew may be getting his thoughts together there. Okay, I see your question. I have a friend who got criticized by his family for going into a journalism career. What advice would you give for people like my friend? I get, with not knowing more. I can understand how it happens, because as we talked about before, people have lost trust in journalism, and other people are seeking particular perspectives, and so it may be that they think that particular outlet that your friend went into is too conservative or too liberal or unfair or biased. I see how these things happen. I think the best that your friend can do is to just do a good job and prove over time. It's not going to happen overnight. Some of those Thanksgiving and Christmas and birthday dinners are going to be contentious. But don't try to be a lightning rod. Just, I have found in life that it's better to prove with your actions and with your work, to let that speak for you, as opposed to what you can say. If people have their minds a particular way, oftentimes what we say will not necessarily change it. What we do might.
That's a wonderful advice for that particular friend. Yes.
Yeah. I have found that, I will say this, I know we're getting close to the end of the hour. When I left NBC, I had to change my social media handles, because they were all Tracie Potts NBC, Tracie Potts NBC, and I'm not there anymore. And I really thought long and hard about what I wanted it to be. Was I going to just put my name, Tracie Potts? Was I going to do something cute? And I landed with Tracie Inspires, because that's how I feel. I feel that's a part of my role in life now, is to inspire people, whether they are the young people that I work with here, whether they are my colleagues, whether they are people who, may have seen me or may remember my work on TV, or new people that I may meet. And I don't think that's only my role. I think that our world would be a lot better if we all use the skills and the opportunity that we have to inspire someone else. Can't happen every day, but when we have that opportunity, I love doing that. And I love seeing how it, either puts a smile on somebody's face or maybe helps them wipe a tear after a really difficult time. or helps get someone through a difficult time, or helps someone start thinking, hey, maybe there's something different or something better I can do. I get a lot of fulfillment from that.
Oh, thank you so much, Tracie. That's wonderful because here in the DC culture, I've started to notice that there's a passing on culture, passing on your wisdom, passing on what inspires you. And personally, I got that since the first time I met you at the Eisenhower Institute. And now you've made time to share us again the very details of what makes you you and what makes you so Tracie inspires. That's your tagline for social media says. So thank you so much, Tracie, honestly. And with that, we're getting closer to the end. So if there are any questions, last thoughts, please let us know. Put it in the chat or raise your hand so that you can ask. If not, we're gonna wait a little bit more, but if not, I'm just going to move on. So since we're closing to the end, we're coming to an end, I'm going to say a very heartfelt thank you to Tracie for joining us today. And I'm also going to ask, are you open to any of the audience members or those watching on YouTube to reach out to you via LinkedIn if they're interested in talking with you more? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, certainly they can reach me via LinkedIn. I'm Tracie Potts. They can also go to my website, traciepotts.com, and there's a way to contact me there.
Perfect. Thank you for all the resources you shared, all your experiences, and how you've really seen the change in media these days. So really appreciate it. And as PLEN, who we inspire to pull women and other marginalized communities into public policy and even media is directly related to that as well. So we are just really thankful that you're such a perfect person to represent what we stand for. And thank you for all that you do. And I hope we can continue to keep track of what you are going to do with your.
I'm going to keep track of you too, because as I said on my social media when I was promoting this, I'm looking forward to being inspired as I am. I remember when you reached out to me after that visit to our DC office, and it's just very inspiring to see other young women developing, and young people in general, the people that I work with here at Gettysburg College and others, moving into public policy. And you guys are going to be the future change makers of the world, and we're just here to hand over the baton and give you some encouragement.
Yes, and we have our responsibility is to take that baton and hold it tight. So thank you so much, Tracie, and thank you for everyone for joining us today. And we'll see you next time at the next PLEN Talk or the next seminars.